the amount of people who we've dealt with over the years, for example, who went into IT and tech and coding and computers in the 90s and 2000s, because that's where everybody was going to make a fortune. And then we were getting them in the late 2000s, 2010s, burnt out, miserable. I hate this. I'm one step ahead of my boss, and I despise going into work. And they needed to completely pivot out into something utterly different that is aligned with their interests and their personality. And it's difficult to do at that stage because you've got mortgage, you've got kids, you might need to take a step or two down. So if you can get onto the right track for you from an earlier age, you'll be much further along your path.
Welcome back to Good for the Hive, the podcast where I get to speak to some inspiring guests to share their life lessons and take a look at the question, what is a good life? This week's guest, Stephen Shortt, is an author, a speaker, and a thought leader. Stephen is on a mission to make the world a better place with happy people in fulfilling, rewarding careers. We talk all about Stephen's version of Ikigai, something that I love talking about. We talk about how you can do anything, but you can't necessarily do everything, and why you probably hate your job right now. Stephen very kindly gave me the opportunity to do the career fit assessment. And now at the ripe old age of 40, I now know the 16 careers that perfectly fit my personality, interests, and aptitudes. And spoiler alert, podcast host isn't on the list. If you enjoyed the episode, please do give it a like and share. And if you're new around here, do subscribe. All the new likes and subs help us to continue to grow and attract inspiring guests, just like Stephen. Let's jump into the episode. Stephen Shortt, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks very much for having me, Alex.
No problem at all. We'll start this podcast where we start them all, and I will ask you, what is a good life to you?
What is a good life? Wow. So for me, good life is where you have the freedom to be able not to do everything you want, but to do what you want. And I keep saying it to my girls, you can be anything you want, you just can't be everything you want. So having an understanding of what you want to have or what you want to accomplish and what are the most important things, and being able to at least work towards them, even if you never get to accomplish them if they're lofty goals.
What age do you think you were when you realized that life has constraints? You can't be everything, you can't do everything.
What am I now? 47, so 46? No. That you can't do everything. Because it's
quite an annoying realization, isn't it? When you're younger, you think you're bulletproof and you think you've got all the time in the world to become whatever you want, and you can change that at the drop of a hat.
I do remember seeing a quote when I was about 18, 19, and I'm pretty sure it was Mark Twain that had this thing of the 16-year-old is really, really embarrassed by his father that he doesn't know anything and he's stupid and he doesn't know the ways of the world. But by the time he reaches 21, he's amazed at how much his father has learned. So I think it's probably around that time. It's around that teenagey time going, no, you don't know anything. I know what I'm going to do. And then you go off and try and do something, and life slaps you in the face a little bit to put you back in your box a bit. So probably around late teens, early 20s gone, maybe I need to have a bit more of a think about this instead of just going, oh yeah, I'll do that. Actually, I suppose it was probably later than that where it really, really struck me. It was when I started working on my why, and that was well into my 30s. I've been working and running businesses for a long time, but I wasn't really happy. I was getting frustrated and I was not sure why. And I had a mind map of probably about 70 different ideas for different businesses or different projects or different this or that. And when I started working on my why, because I'd look at that mind map and go, this is like the laws of physics. I could live to be 200 and still not accomplish these. And by then I'll probably tripled the size of this mind map. But when I started figuring out really what it is that I wanted to do and what I wanted to accomplish, then so many of those ideas fell away. They're still great ideas because, I mean, they're mine, so obviously they're gold. But they're all still good ideas. They're just not good ideas for me because that's not ultimately what I want to do.
And sticking with you as an example, what led you to your place in life before you discovered your why? Did you follow the usual sort of everyone's telling me I should do A levels, then everyone's telling me I should go to university, then everyone's telling me I should go into consulting, etc. How did you sort of meander through life before you started to focus in and hone in on what you actually wanted to do?
So I got a little bit of a cheat code in life in that our family business, what I do now, we had two family businesses, we sold one. One of our family businesses was career guidance coaching. So from a young age, I had a qualified, like experienced career guidance coach, being able to look at my personality, look at my abilities, do the assessments. I remember I've been doing assessments since I was a kid. And it always kind of led towards marketing, creativity, business, entrepreneurship, working for myself, that kind of stuff. So it was always in that realm of stuff. And that was great. And that gave me a huge amount of, even though it was quite expansive, it gave me a lot of focus. And then when I narrowed down, so marketing and entrepreneurship, it's exactly what I want to do. And I'm doing keynotes and writing books and all the rest of it. And I'm talking, it's all to do with communication. But when I look at it through the lens now of my core purpose and my core values, it narrows it down into something which is much more enjoyable as well as freeing, funnily enough. The constraint gives you freedom.
So back in the day, more recently, we hear words like MBTI and that's the Myers-Briggs one, HBDI, etc. What tools did you have back then? Were they simplified versions of pretty much the same thing, or what were you using as tools back then?
You can't really get much simpler than MBTI or DISC, for example. They're fairly basic tools. Colors and DISC, really good. MBTI, I don't really use. I don't really play around with. I quite like Clifton Strengths Finders. I like that as a simple to understand tool to see where your strengths lie, but it doesn't give you a lot of insight into the different facets of your personality. DISC and colors is a really, really basic, if you're going to do something that anybody can just understand and go, you're one of four. DISC and colors is really simple and easy to understand, but again, very basic. Growing up, I used things like 16PF, which was a 16 personality factors, still around, but not as well known. Currently, we are distributors and we use Hogan assessments almost exclusively now. We do a lot of stuff with Pearson and with MHS, for example, but Hogan is what we use for personality, which is 28 different scales from 0 to 100, and everybody has a score on every scale. So it gives you a really nuanced feel for it. But so long as everything maps back to the 5-factor model, which is different from MBTI, so the 5-factor model, and that's the basis for all modern psychology, it gives you a pretty deep understanding.
What is the end goal? Is the end goal not just to know what the individual or the individual's aptitudes are? Is it actually an element of self-awareness that not only does that need to be mapped out, but the person needs to be aware of what they're good at and acknowledge that and engage with that, rather than saying, I'm quite good at marketing, but I fancy something else?
So there's a couple of different things they're slightly nuanced. So there's aptitudes and personality and interests, and the three of these things combined is what gives you a much more holistic view. So your aptitudes, broadly speaking, I mean, I'm believe in the multiple intelligences. So there's lots of different aptitudes. People can have a natural ability for dance, for example, or kinesthetics, or numbers, or speaking, or football, or something like that. But in the broad scheme of things, when it comes to careers, when it comes to the majority of work, there's verbal, numerical, and abstract reasoning. And those three together are known as general ability. So those are ability tests. So how you're able to communicate, how you're able to deal with numbers, and how you're able to think outside the box. Those are the three, broadly speaking, areas of what's called general ability. Those are more of an indication of how good you're going to be or how comfortable you're going to be at different levels within the organization, within different levels of complexity. If you have somebody, for example, who's kind of middle of the line, in the average, I mean, we're all talking about bell curves, so the majority of us are in the middle anyway. So if you're talking about somebody who's kind of in the middle on numeracy, and they're interested in numbers, and they're interested in working with spreadsheets and things like that, they could be an accounts technician or accounts payable or something which doesn't require the same level of complexity. The further up they get in their ability and comfort in working with numbers, then they might be getting accountant, CFO, this kind of stuff. But a CFO also would need to have good communication skills because they're going to be talking to different people. So there's lots of little nuances that go in with the ability. Then you have your personality. So you can be, for want of simplifying it, extrovert, introvert. No such thing. Everyone's an ambivert. But if you're an extroverted numbers person, you're probably more likely going to be a director, or like who's good at the who's good with numbers and who's higher on the ability scale. You might be more of an engaging big corporate type. Whereas if you don't really like people, you're more likely going to be a very successful accountant where you're just dealing with those numbers and bring it in. So understanding your personality and where you fit on that, from ambition to adjustment to sociability to interpersonal sensitivity, all this kind of stuff, sees where you're going to go with that. And then it comes down to your interests, because 80% of people can do 80% of the jobs that are out there. It all comes down to whether you are interested in doing it or not.
So thank you for all that.
Sorry, that was a lot.
No, it's good. It's really good. When do you think people should be taking these tests? Let's call them tests. I know they're not, strictly tests, but when
assessments is probably the
assessments.
more...
When would you assess someone?
So we've built our own for career guidance, which we recommend people take at 16, not younger than 16. And at 16 is the first. You might take it again at 18, just because if you think back to when you were 16 and we were talking about this, I know everything. Your interests might have some fairly big shifts at that point, but once you get to kind of 18, they're fairly not stable, but they take longer to have big swings. So if you take one at 16 and then again it's at 18, for example, and then you can do these things every 5 years, your personality, unless you've had a massive shift where you changed your state of personality, a life-altering traumatic event or something like that, your personality is not likely to change dramatically from one end of a spectrum to another, but you're going to evolve over time. And even you've just moved apartment, for example. So when you were younger, you probably didn't need to have the stability of going, oh, well, I can rent in this place or I can rent in that place and I'm out with my friends and I'm building something and I'm doing stuff for fun. The older you get, the more you're kind of, I want a bit more stability. I want a bit more security. I want to make sure if I'm taking out a mortgage or making sure that I have to pay rent in a nice place, okay, I want maybe a little bit less risk, but whatever. So we change as we go through life. Not dramatically, but we evolve.
My friend Megan, who I've had on here, is a meditation coach, amongst many other things. She's got a Brené Brown quote. I'll butcher it completely, but at some point in your life puts its hand on your shoulder and whispers in your ear, "I'm not fucking around." And at that point, you life gets real. And some of these decisions, these fantasies that you have when you're a little bit younger, and you lose options as you sort of evolve and get older.
So I haven't heard that quote, but the first thing that popped into my mind when this ethereal being puts their hand on your shoulder and goes, okay, time to stop fucking about, is usually when you have a little stick that goes blue.
It's not happened for me just yet, but yeah,
right, well.
I'm sure that's a complete life-changing event. So you're the first career expert that we've had on here. And when I first sat down and I thought about this podcast and what we were going to talk about on here, I found lots of different ways of defining life and how to lead life and what is a good life and how do you break that down into different segments, as is my mind, and how is I work out problems. And so it breaks down. One that I quite like is where you break your life into 4 quadrants, and you've got health, growth, environment, and people. And there's not one of those segments that isn't massively impacted by what you decide to do for a third of your life every single day. You wake up, you think about it, you do it, and it just impacts absolutely everything. Why is it so important for people to find a career that aligns with their interests and aptitudes in the context of living a good life?
I mean, you said it yourself there. I mean, you're going to spend a minimum of a third of your life doing this. Another third of your life, you're going to be asleep. So, I mean, if you take out how many hours you're going to need to sleep, the amount of time that you're going to be spending doing this thing, why would you be going in to be miserable? There was a thing that was bandied around a lot when millennials are really starting to join the workforce, and all these boomers and Gen X's, and they were giving out going, they want to have a purpose, and they don't want to pay their dues and all this kind of stuff. Who doesn't want to have a job with some kind of a purpose that aligns with what they're doing? Now, there might be a difference, like a different generation. Their purpose might be, I am going to work to put bread on the table, to put food on the table. But there was a purpose behind it. Now, even if you think of Maslow's hierarchy, like as a society, we're going up and up this ladder because poverty, thankfully, is going down. There's still a lot of people that are suffering from it. But as we as a society go up and up, we're more about self-actualization. So we don't have that sense of we need to keep the wolf from the door. A lot of people still do need to keep the wolf from the door. People are still struggling. But as a society, there's more abundance. So we don't have that same sense of pressure of, if I don't go and work for 40 hours down in the factory, we're all going to be homeless and I have 16 kids or whatever it is. So it makes sense that as we evolve, there's more meaning needed behind what we're doing. Now, I also think, and I've heard a lot of people talking about this, it's probably not the healthiest thing to expect your work to give you everything that we used to get from lots of different facets of our life. So that our work gives us meaning and gives us the network and gives us our friends and gives us our outlets and gives us our hobbies. Maybe it's not the best that we expect our workplace to give us all of that, but we can still expect our workplace to be something that we enjoy somewhere we enjoy going to, whether that's our spare bedroom or an office or whatever. And then if we're not getting the exercise, or we're not getting the competitive nature, or we want a bit of competition, but we're in a collaborative environment, which we want to be because we don't want to be killing each other all day long, we can go join a five-a-side football team or something like that to have those facets of our personality and our interests.
I did go back to another person I've had on here. Monish was one of my first interviewees. And he said two things I didn't massively agree with, and I'd like to get your take on them. Firstly, I started talking about Ikigai, very much what you're saying about the quadrants, and trying to find what you actually put on earth to do in a perfect world. And he sort of pushed back on that a little bit. And he said, well, life's not really like that. We still need people to take the bins out. We still need people to do the not undesirable jobs. So if everyone's there chasing their ideal job, who's going to do this? Life's not like that. Do you think that's a pessimistic way of looking at it, or do you think he's just a complete realist and not everyone gets to do it?
So I'm not going to say anything negative about him at all. No, I fully agree. There's jobs that there are some people, like you're hosting a podcast, you're probably a more creative person and somebody who likes to think about ideas and likes to think about the big questions of the universe. There are other people who are very process driven, who the idea of all this, that fluffy, hippy dippy stuff is just, it's their definition of hell. They actually want to be in an environment where they can see a project through from start to finish. So there's a lot of people who, they don't mind that they get paid quite well to be a bin collector, for example. They start early in the morning. They come in, they see a process through, so they follow this process, they follow the same routes to be able to pick up the same bins, to be able to put the same stuff in. They're finished by the end of the day, and they get to spend time with their kids. They get to spend time going to the museums in the afternoon. They pick up their kids from school or whatever. So their interest is different from ours. It's not to say that it's right or wrong. And this is one of the things that I think is missing from a lot of young people now, that everyone's being told, you need to go to college or you're a failure, and you need to be all this high flyer and setting up one of these billion-dollar unicorn companies, when actually there's so many people who are these entrepreneurs burning themselves out and miserable because actually they're not built for it's not supposed to be like this. There are, as your friend says, so many other things that need to be done and can be done well and happily by people who are interested in that. We did a project with a wholesale kind of cash and carry place here in Ireland, a big wholesale distributor, and they had a huge turnover of staff because the thinking was, nobody stand packing shelves all day. We need to get robots in because nobody wants to do this work because it's boring. So we actually changed the framework of what kind of people we were looking for, made it very process driven, very people who were very clear about wanting to see a start, middle, and end of a job, and then feeling that sense of satisfaction when a row was fully packed. Their turnover rate went down to less than 10%. because we were able to target the right people that got intrinsic satisfaction from completing the work they were doing. They were getting paid pretty well. They could be working in a shop, they could be working somewhere else, but they've no interest in being upper management or anything like that. But they want to be able to put food on the table and enjoy their work.
I like that intrinsic, what do you say, intrinsic satisfaction. Is there an element of life these days that no matter what you're doing, what your lot is in life, where you're going, to live a good life, you need to make peace and be tranquil with whatever you are doing? If it is process driven and you like process driven things, and not be moaning, not be complaining, and just be the best that you can be. If you're packing shelves, if you're doing that sort of thing. So is there a way of coming to terms with that and being happy and actually being proud of what you do? And it's like you say, it's beginning, middle, and end. This is what I'm here on doing, and I'm helping the bigger cause.
So I would be a terrible shelf packer. I would get bored, and I'll start it 100 times. I'll start it, but I won't finish it because
yeah. Or you wouldn't turn up today.
I don't even know. I might even not now. So sorry. There's a lot of things were going through my head there about what you were saying about the intrinsic stuff, and one of my core values is humbly proud. So I'm proud of what we've done, but humble enough to know that we can always improve it. And the wording is very important. It's humbly proud, not proudly humble. And we actually had an issue with a former team member who put too much emphasis on the other bit. And for me, I don't think so. I talk about this with my wife a lot because my wife and I are kind of like yin and yang. We have a really nice balance of each other. I'm head in the clouds and wanting this would be great and we should build this and we can do this and we can go here and we can have this adventure and everything else. Whereas she's much more practical and she thinks, whereas my view, because my personality type in inquisitive is like 6 months to 6 years vision, whereas her view is 6 days to 6 weeks vision and like, what do we need to do in this time? So very process driven. So she's always very happy with where she is and what she has. I'm happy with what I have and where I am, but want to be doing more, want to be getting better, want to be building more. We have a lot of conversations as to why that is. Is that a failing in me? Was I not hugged enough as a child or one of these things to try and figure out why do I always want that? Why am I not just happy with what I have? Whereas I actually am happy. I just want to be growing. I want to feel like I'm moving as opposed to sitting still. So the intrinsic stuff for me, I'm very happy where I am. I'm very happy, very proud of what I've built, what I've accomplished, where I've come from. But I have a much bigger view of where I want to be, for example. Then there was another sorry, your comment gave me a lot of things to think about there.
I quite like some Greek wisdom models. I call them Stoicism, but they pinch from all different parts of it. And it just takes me back to like Muhammad Ali saying he might have been the greatest boxer, but whatever he'd put his mind to, he was going to be the greatest of whatever task he wanted to do. And finding that internal, you called it internal satisfaction, that internal, I like to call it more tranquility and just peacefulness, that you find peace in moving and evolving and learning and striving and doing extra things. And it might seem that you're unhappy with your current part, but you're not. You're just, what makes you happy is that you're constantly striving, constantly doing extra things, and everyone's different. But trying to broadly put everyone in the world into one basket, I was just curious to know, is it possible for everyone to be happy in what they're doing as long as they know how to make themselves happy, I guess?
I mean, if you take out, remove psychoses or mental health problems and things like that, there's no such thing as a bad personality. There's no such thing as a bad personal makeup. There's simply a bad fit for where you are, whether that's in society or job or relationship or something else. So there are people who will be phenomenal marketeers. For example, I talk about marketeers because I am a marketeer. They'll be phenomenal marketeers for a data-driven, highly specific, highly regulated industry. And we've done a lot of selection for people in that kind of industry. But if you were to take them as the marketing manager and drop them into a hospitality, high touch point hotel chain, they'd be miserable. They'd be terrible because it's not their area of their unique mix of their personality, their abilities, and their interests, and where they're able to align all those, because their personality doesn't lend themselves to that, and they're not really interested in the high touch. They're more interested in the data side of things. So if people are not happy in what they're doing, it's not necessarily that they're in the wrong job or the wrong type of industry, marketing, finance, whatever. They might be in the wrong culture. Or they might be in the wrong area. So you can be somebody who would be an amazing accountant in one business would be a terrible accountant, or could be a terrible accountant in another industry, because the cultures are different. There's a great book on this called Multipliers by Liz Wiseman. And it's about how there are people who are multipliers and diminishers. And she talks about people being accidental diminishers. And you have people who can be absolute superstars in one department, and then they go work for another manager. And just because of some changes in how they behave or how they interact, the people who were superstars in another area are just completely undercut in another part. And it's trying to understand what those accidental diminishers are that actually diminish the work of the people around you.
Okay. In this work, is there also an experiment where you put a high flyer with, I've heard the word diminishers before, and it was like you mix the two, and if you don't get the balance right, multipliers can then turn into diminishers, and people can completely flip on it, and then they're just unproductive, and it just doesn't work for them anymore.
Yeah. In the exact same environment, I think there was one example, I think, of a military cadet, this guy who was going really up through the ranks until he met a certain supervisor, and then he was just in shambles, and he was failing everything because he was being micromanaged by this guy, or the connection just wasn't the same, and he was being diminished by the behavior of this guy. And before he basically got turfed out and was told, okay, well, maybe we were wrong about you, a different commander came and said, okay, well, let's do this. I think it was a tank maneuver test or something. And he did it flawlessly because he didn't feel the sense of pressure from the guy. And that's when they started researching this idea of, there are some people who do well. You probably have seen it yourself. There's some people who are naturally, let's say, results orientated, who are going to thrive in a high results orientated environment, like a Ryanair, for example, and a highly competitive push. There are people who thrive on that, and there are people whose personalities and interests really lend themselves to be their absolute best, even though they get tired, but they feel invigorated because they thrive on that energy. But you take somebody else who's more collaborative or something like that, and it's going to be hell on earth for them. So it's the same kind of environment, just the different people. So there's no such thing as a bad personality, it's simply a bad fit.
Yeah, no, it's funny you say. I've definitely seen that in my own career. As you were talking then about, you just do a switch, exactly the same job, exactly the same requirements, and what you're doing, your working hours, your expectations, exactly the same. Different team around me, and I was a completely different human being. It's funny how you said it like that. Why do so many people get it wrong, do you think? Why do so many people end up, your mission is to create happy people by putting them in fulfilling careers.
So I want to make the world a better place with happy people in fulfilling, rewarding careers. Again, it's because we talked about this earlier. The majority of your life is going to be spent in a career, so why not find one that's fulfilling and rewarding? I think a lot of the time people, especially as they're starting out in their careers, they might be getting bad advice. Now, all of this advice is given with the best intentions in the world. I mean, their parents are not trying to make them miserable. Their parents are not trying to say, oh, get a safe job or do this because they want their children to be miserable. It's just their thinking is not of the current world. Like, they're thinking in their scale, get a safe job, get something that's pensionable, like clock in, clock out, find nice workmates, and join a drama society and join a gym or whatever outside. Because they don't see it. I mean, how many people now are making a living on podcasts and creating these media empires, and 2 or 3 people media empires where they're able to build a really nice living doing exactly what they want to do? That was unthinkable when we were growing up. I mean, my parents, probably because we kind of keep more of an eye on what's happening in those industries. But I talked to in schools now. I give a talk on what's the future of work in schools. And I show a picture of these arenas of gamers. and thousands of people watching people playing video games. And I talk to the teachers and I say, can you imagine when you were growing up, if you said to your parents, I'm going to be a professional video game player, they'd be like, shut up. You're going to the hospital, you're going to get fixed, and then you're going to go and be a civil servant or get something else. The world has changed so dramatically. So the information that people are being given was correct information, but is no longer correct information, and is not the right information for that person. It's not the right fit for that person. The amount of people who we've dealt with over the years, for example, who went into IT and tech and coding and computers in the 90s and 2000s, because that's where everybody was going to make a fortune. And then we were getting them in the late 2000s, 2010s, burnt out, miserable. I hate this. I'm one step ahead of my boss, and I despise going into work. And they needed to completely pivot out into something utterly different that is aligned with their interests and their personality. And it's difficult to do at that stage because you've got mortgage, you've got kids, you might need to take a step or two down. So if you can get onto the right track for you from an earlier age, you'll be much further along your path. And not to say that your path when you start out on 18 is what you're going to be doing when you're 80, but as things evolve, so a lot of companies, especially bigger companies now, have these environmental consultants and environmental specialists who are dealing with CSR and dealing with DEI and all this kind of stuff that never existed 10 years ago. This was not a line item that people could have on their books, so it didn't exist. A lot of the people who are in that now were in a similar enough space. They were in the HR space, or they were in the development space, the learning space, and they were able to branch out into it. So if you get on the right track, as these new careers, and there will be hundreds of new careers that will emerge over the next 10, 20 years, if you're on the right track for you, you'll be able to branch out into more and more interesting areas for you.
Well, he spoke earlier about the difference. If the stick turns blue, your life all changes. My advice to any young person that I've ever met has not changed, because it's my little perspective and it's what would have impacted me. So if anyone ever asks me if they're 16 or 18, my advice to them would always be, don't go straight into university. Take a year out, do something, realize how hard life can be, and then go back and do what you actually want to do. And that's a reflection on what I did. I went straight to university and then took a year out. And I worked on cruise ships for a little while, and that is hard, 15-hour days, no laws at sea, you do it. And then you come out of that and you think, oh, I wish I'd have studied a little bit harder and maybe done a different degree that could have been a bit more applicable, rather than a generalist degree that now I just have no direction. I don't know what I want to do. So my advice to others is always reflective of basically the mistakes that I feel like I've made and that other people should do. If you were to give solid advice from your knowledge of the changing workplace, the future of work, are there any broad strokes that maybe you would have said something different in the past, but now you say something different now? Is there anything that stayed consistent, apart from work hard at school and work out what you want to do as early as you possibly can? Is there anything that just stays true?
I don't necessarily tell people to work hard at school, because there are some people that they're working hard at school is not necessarily for them.
Their gig, yeah.
For me, it hasn't really changed. But again, because I've grown up in this notion of understanding what your personality is, understanding what your interests are and what your abilities are, to be able to see what's the clear path for you. For me, what I tell students all the time, and I really love the advice. I wrote an article last week. We had our the equivalent, our leaving cert, which is like your O levels or whatever exam results come out. So I wrote an article about that, and one of the options was the rogue option of taking a year off and doing something if you didn't get the results that you wanted. Because I'm a big believer in going out and getting life experience, huge. But it depends on the person. It depends on you. So having that self-awareness of your personality, of your interests, what you're looking for, what you're trying to do, knowing that can all change and can change dramatically in a relatively short space of time, understanding what that is, then being able to make the decisions that are best for you, not that are best for the people that are advising you.
No, definitely. One question, one area that I did want to explore. Growing up, I don't remember a guidance counsellor at all. I don't remember the option to speak to one. I don't remember. Grew up in Lincolnshire in England. There were people around that you could talk to, like your head of sixth form, these sort of people. Obviously, you had your parents and you had these sort of people. But we don't go in for it that or we didn't, certainly growing up in the 90s. In Ireland, is it different? America, there's always seemed like I always fancied becoming a guidance counselor. I thought that'd be quite good. And I thought I'd quite enjoy that. But it's not really a thing over here, unless it is, and I'm completely missing it.
So it's not in the UK. In Ireland, every secondary school has a career guidance counsellor. In it, in Ireland we adopted the, broadly speaking, the UK educational system, but we adopted that idea from the States. In the UK, you don't currently have mandatory career guidance counselors. It's becoming more and more prevalent. There is the Shaw Foundation or something like that, which is an endowment fund, I think, which has been pushing for more of this in schools. Where I think, and it's a danger that still happens a lot, but because there's not a lot of interpersonal stuff in it in schools in the UK, the danger of this happening is more prevalent, where people are being recommended what courses to take based on what subjects they are good at in school, what careers they should be looking at, and then what courses lead to those careers. So there's the idea being, oh, you were good at maths, you should study engineering, or you were good at maths, you should study accountancy, or you're good at communication, you should study marketing, without a real view on what ultimately that career is going to be. What I tell students all the time is we're not really interested in the next 4 to 5 years of your academic career. We're interested in the next 40 to 50 years of your actual career. What is going to leave you fulfilled and rewarded, and how do we backtrack that to today? The easiest example is you might have somebody who's really interested in politics, and they really get involved. They really love politics. They love the idea of local politicians and working on documents and making their communities better, et cetera, et cetera. But they would actually be miserable as a politician, being hindered, being hampered, having to be careful what they say, having to focus on getting reelected instead of being able to make big change. But they might be a really good communicator. They might be a really gifted communicator, and people are saying to them, oh, you should go into politics. That's looking at just the subject as opposed to what's relevant in that subject about what's intrinsically important for them. So what we would say in a situation like that is, why not explore becoming a marketeer, becoming a PR agent, becoming somebody who deals with words all the time, who's able to work with lots of different things. And then in your spare time, you can pro bono work for local politicians that you believe in, to be able to help them to make your society better. So you're still involved in politics, you're still interested in politics, but the core part of your talent and interest is best served with sharing this information and being in a more fulfilling, rewarding career as a marketeer, for example.
So a lot of the work revolves around, you said it before, finding your why. So if we were talking to, let's call them a lost individual, someone who's unhappy in their career, and if we look at a 20-year-old, a 30-year-old, and a 40-year-old, what would your advice be to a 20-year-old who is unhappy in what they're doing, or just lost in the sort of sense that they don't care too much about it? They're just sort of drifting through because they can't find something tangible to latch onto and drive them through.
I mean, it's whether they have something that they can't latch onto, or if they're 30 and 40 and they just go, look, I don't know what I want to do, but I know I don't want to do this anymore. It's the same. It's spending a bit of time. They can do it themselves. I mean, we can do it with them as coaches. We have the experience and we have the software to be able to do it. But people can do this themselves if they want to. It just takes longer. Figuring out what it is that you enjoy doing. Now, I know I just said don't do a course because you enjoyed maths, but it's what is the actual fundamental part of why you enjoy doing it. So if you enjoy working with numbers, do you actually enjoy working with calibration, or do you enjoy working with money numbers, or do you enjoy working with percentages to be able to do statistics? Like, what is it specifically within that broad range of numbers? Or I like working with people. Okay, fabulous. Do you want to be a healthcare? No, I hate sick people. Okay, so you don't like working with those people. Okay, do you like working with? So figuring out the real fine tune of when they say I like working with people, or I don't like working with people, I want to be outside, or I don't want to be outside. A lot of people say, oh, I don't want to be tied to a desk in an office. Okay, what is it about being tied to a desk in the office? Is it that you feel that you're disconnected? Is it you feel like a cog in the machine, that you're not going to be adding value to something? Because there are plenty of desk jobs where you can actually have a real community of people and you can be making a difference in the world. You're still technically working at a desk, but it's a different kind of office. So figuring out those things, what are those interests that you have? What kinds of things do you enjoy doing? Where do you feel a flow? Where do you, in any job that you've done, where have you felt, I've really enjoyed doing that bit? I really enjoyed, for me, I used to really love working in the summer camps with teenagers because I love the flow of just the energy of people churning in and out and the energy of activities and things happening. So I really enjoyed that people to people support. Then figuring out, you talked about Ikigai. We have our own, it's a 3 version, because with Ikigai, it's what can you get paid for? Because we're about careers. Every career, you're going to get some kind of fulfillment or rewarding from it. So it's, what are you interested in? What are you good at? And what does the market need? And then pulling that all together. So sitting down and spending some time working on that, not by yourself. You can talk to loved ones. You can talk to people who know you best, and actually ask their advice, because sometimes we can't see the things, we can't see the trends that are right in front of us, because they're right in front of us. So sitting down and talking with people, again, whether that's a career guidance counselor or whether that's your mate down the pub, well, maybe not your mate down the pub, but being able to sit down with people who know the world a little bit, it's a good place to start.
You've absolutely nailed it. Because I was thinking, as you were talking about myself at 20, 30, etc., and having that conversation, and I feel you need someone else. You need a guide. Well, a guidance counselor is perfect because it's their job to spend that time and they're interested in these things. Talking to someone else, they could give you...
The other benefit of a guidance counselor, and it is worth really underlining this, they know more about the different types of industries. If you're sitting down with your mate that's only been in finance, they can tell you lots of finance related stuff. But if you're really into marketing, or if you're really into design or something, they're going to be limited in what kind of actionable advice they can give you. So having somebody who has that broader knowledge, they're going to be able to give you a deeper understanding of yourself.
And to properly interrogate those questions you were talking about, like the desk work, you might in your own head say, oh, I don't like that, and then just sort of veer away from it. But if you had someone like the questions you were firing just then, why don't you like it? What's it about it? Be more specific, get into it a little bit more. And you just can't do that in your own head. You need to verbalize that, and then you need to have that like mirrored back to you so that you can actually then justify it and say, well, it's actually X, Y, and Z. And then you get to the root cause, and then you can actually figure these things out. Unless you've got, like you say, a really good friend who's got a really good perspective on a few different things, so that you can actually get these things off your chest and have that mirrored back to you. I find that very hard to do on your own.
It's very hard to do on your own. And the inner monologue that we have, I mean, it's disastrous. It is just the worst place you could be. And you could be in a job. I mean, I have this whyouhateyourjob.com, this website of the top 5 reasons that people hate their jobs. And it could be, you might be feeling, I hate this entire industry. I hate being in this. I hate doing what I'm doing. Below that, I hated everything else. It could just be that Sharon, who works next to you, is a bit of a pain. And actually, it's just the wrong people in that environment. But actually, if you were to move to a different department or just go to another company doing the same thing, you would feel completely unlocked. But if we're only having this conversation in our head and not challenging our thoughts, of course it's going to be true, because that's all it can be. Because that's the way, like, this is the really interesting thing. We are not very good at thinking that we are wrong. That's where our unconscious biases come from. When we have ideas in our head and somebody else has a different point of view from us, or a different way from looking at things in us, our unconscious mind goes, oh, well, that's not how I look at it, so they're wrong. And that's where our unconscious biases problems come from, when we don't actually address those preconceived assumptions that we have, or something that was told to us when we were 4 years old that we just go, click, that's true now forever. So having those internal dialogues without people who can push back on you a little bit, we're never going to get very far.
And you mentioned you basically Ikigai minus the can you get paid for it, because all careers in theory are there because they're funded. Do you work with entrepreneurs, and how can every individual be an entrepreneur? Or some people so much better skilled and aptitude for the things that you need to do it on your own?
So to answer both your questions, everybody can be an entrepreneur. I'm an entrepreneur. I've grown up as an entrepreneur. I'm the director of leadership for the Entrepreneurs Organization for Europe this year. I've been involved in coaching entrepreneurs at all levels, from under $1 million to over $1 million. I've done lots of it. Everybody can be an entrepreneur, but it comes back to what we were talking about earlier on. You can be an entrepreneur, but whether you should be an entrepreneur, just because you can doesn't mean that you should, because you might be better. You might be supremely poised with interest, ability, and aptitudes to be an amazing CFO for an entrepreneur without having that the stress of juggling all of these things and being able to bring in the business and being able to manage the people and all the rest of it. You'll be going, look, I'll deal with the numbers. I love the excitement of this and I love the growth of this, but I have no interest in being the face of the organization. We have this in my business. I have my COO, Mick, worked at me for 14 years in the other business and then in this business. He's very process driven. And again, we're the yin and the yang. He's the process driven guy who thinks in terms of maximum 6 weeks. Like, what do we need to do to make sure that this happens? We work in 90-day schedules, and he's very process oriented. He has all of the abilities to go out and run his own business and to start up his own business, but he doesn't want it. He knows that actually being part of this, where we complement each other, is a much better way for him to be able to have work-life balance, to still be able to accomplish the things that we want to accomplish, because he's bought into the idea of what we're doing and making the world a better place with happy people and fulfilling, rewarding careers and all of the different things that we do for that. But he's no interest in being an entrepreneur, but he's fundamentally important to being able to run this place smoothly, because if it was left to me, everything would be on fire.
It's been so interesting, Stephen, to get your insights, and I think it's awakened a lot of things in me and how I look at things and how I am quite closed-minded about how I view the world. So it's really, really interesting to hear how you do what you do and why you've got such a passion for it. We'll jump into the quick fire shortly. Is there anything else that you wanted to say that we haven't got round to yet, about the stuff that you do, about bringing it back to how to live a good life at any age? Is there anything that you were thinking would come up today that hasn't quite yet?
No, I mean, so I'm really interested in people's careers, and I'm interested in the future of work and how we're going to go as a society. I'm really fascinated by what's happened since 2019. Obviously 2020, don't need to have a little check mark as to say that word on your podcast, but how the world has evolved and changed and where it's going and the pace that it's going to change at. This is also where even careers that existed 10 years, that didn't exist 10 years ago, that exist now. So in 10 years, there will be careers that are ideal for people who are listening to this podcast right now that don't exist right now. So being aware of what you're interested in, setting yourself on the trajectory for what is going to be the ultimate career for you. You're still going to be happy in the career that you're in because it's more aligned with your interests and your aptitudes. But then when these new things start to emerge, you're going to be perfectly placed for that, because the world is going to evolve at a pace that we haven't seen before.
No. And when is it completely oversimplifying everything? When I was a bit younger, the question was posed: if you won the lottery tomorrow, what would you do? Mm-hmm. How would you spend your time? What would you do? Is that still a good question to ask yourself for different ages? If money was no issue now, what would you do to pass the time? You've got to do something. You can't do nothing, because you see what that does when people retire. You've seen the impact that has on people.
So and my view is people don't retire because they get old. People get old because they retire. I think it's a really interesting. My parents are late 70s and early 80s. They're still semi-active within the business from a kind of consulting and a board position point of view, and it keeps them young, it keeps them entertained. And I've seen other people that retire and just sit at home and, I mean, without wanting to be morose about it, seem to be just sitting waiting for death for 20 years. Like they don't have a purpose. They don't have something else to do. I think the idea of, if you won the lottery, what would you do? Again, it kind of comes back to Maslow's thing. Like, if we're at this level and we win the lotto and we jump up to here, that's when you see all these people that go broke within 2 years because they just completely lose the run of themselves because they don't have the mentality to be able to see, okay, well, what do I actually want? What do I want to accomplish? And it's just, I've never had this. Let's go. I suppose it has never been easier to think of yourself as having won the lottery, to be able to say, what would you want to do if you had infinite resources? Because it's so easy to get involved in so many different things now, whether that's virtually joining communities, building different things. I suppose the question of if you won the lottery, what would you spend your time doing? It's like those basic psychometrics. It's a really, really simple way of trying to get to a nugget of what do you like doing? What are your motivators? What are your values? What are your interests? Digging a little bit deeper than what would you do if you won the lotto, that's what gives you more insight into yourself.
Oh, brilliant. No,
That's
I've really enjoyed.
Actually, that's a really interesting. I'm going to have to spend a bit of time. I might write a post about that because there's something really interesting about digging deeper into that.
Into the questions and not keeping the surface value. And that's without a guidance counselor, without anything else. You just sit with that question and you're like, oh, it might be biology, whatever your interest is. It's like, oh, it's this. Oh, maybe it's X, Y, Z. But then it fizzles out. It's nothing tangible. You can't do anything with it because it just doesn't give you enough, I don't think. But then you interrogate it a little bit and then eventually you would find something that flips a switch in your head and like penny drops. That's what I should be doing with my life, not sitting on a podcast chatting to people.
No, I mean, sitting on a podcast chatting to people is a fantastic way of being able to share different ideas and to be able to have these conversations with yourself. And you're asking questions ostensibly for yourself, you're asking for the audience, but being able to tease out your own thoughts as well is a great way of being able to figure out how can I adjust and how can I grow myself.
Okay, let's jump into the quick fire. What book or podcast would you give someone if they asked you, how do I live a good life?
How do I live a good life? Actually, I just finished Jimmy Carr's book. He wrote a book about 2 years ago.
The
Life and
Happiness
Laughter.
One. Oh,
Life
After Laughter? No.
Something like that.
Happily Ever? No. It's got laughter in the pun, hasn't it? Yeah.
It's got laughter in the... Fantastic book. Fantastic. About the craft of stand-up comedy, which I love. About life in general, about how to approach things. His work ethic is actually incredibly dedicated. And how he approaches things and how he thinks about overcoming stuff and going all in. Fantastic book to read.
I've not listened to it myself, but he found his why quite later in life as well, didn't he? Was he in marketing? He was some sort of desk job and then
in Shell or one of these oil companies, and decided, and he packed it all in to become a stand-up comedian and went all in on it. And it's a fascinating, really interesting insight into him. There's a couple of cheesy puns and a couple of off-color jokes that he's known for, but actually the insight that he has into human psyche and actually living a good life, I suppose, is really good. So I'd recommend that.
Okay, I'll find that and I'll put that in the show notes. What was your biggest light bulb moment where you discovered something about yourself?
Where I discovered something about myself was probably that. So 8 years ago when about 8 years ago now, because I was living in Spain at the time, when I spent some time figuring out my why. I'd already been in business for a long time and figuring out my why, the first iteration of it, that what I had 8 years ago was not currently what I have now because it's tweaked over time. But even the first statement of what my why was, being able to look through that lens at that mind map of ideas and all of those ideas that melted away, that gave me such a sense of calm and peace. Like, oh no, they're not, like, I'm not wasting those ideas. They just don't fit with what I want to do. And it gave me such an immense sense of relief and freedom.
So looking at it through a minimalist lens, was it more that the solution was not adding, the solution was detracting or removing things from your life, or dirt on the lens and just giving you that focus because you had less things to think about, taking things away from yourself? I think it was
more focus rather than cutting away. I think I'm an additive person. I'm always yes and.
Mm.
So for me, and I suppose that was why I was like, oh, I don't want to get rid of that because that could be, oh my God, that could be a €1,000,000 idea, or could have a lot of fun doing that, or could have a lot of fun doing that. But actually, when I had that clarity of this is what I want to spend the next 40 years of my life doing, I've spent the last 30 years of my life doing this way, how do I want to spend the next 40? And then when I put that into focus, everything else then was irrelevant. So it's not really, it just dropped away as opposed to cutting it away.
Okay. Of all the skills you've learned, which one do you count as the most important?
It depends on how you define skills, but I would
Something
say
you weren't born with and something you've developed or been taught or honed.
something I've developed and been taught and honed is probably public speaking and
Okay.
speaking in general and communicating.
Did that come
more
naturally for
effectively.
you? Gift of the gab and all that?
Nope.
No?
Well, I mean, in my family, yeah, we talk a lot, but I was really nervous. I actually have, when I was in my last year of primary school, we did this little semester or something on public speaking, and I panicked and left the stage. And then I got an award at the end of the year for being the most improved because I didn't walk off stage. I mean, that's how. And now I give keynotes all over the world. I do workshops and I teach on leadership academies and love it. So that's
How did
probably
you turn
something.
that corner? Was there one thing? Was there anything? Or was it just practice?
Part of it was practice. I've done a couple of courses. I've worked with, there's a fantastic coach. He runs a session called Story to Stage. It's a fantastic way of being able to help you to take your story to bring it onto the stages. And then there was an opportunity for me to speak at a virtual event. I'd done like little workshops and things like that, but there was an opportunity for me to speak at a virtual event during COVID on the same stage as Gary Vaynerchuk, Seth Godin, some heavy hitters. And I was like, yep, I'll do that.
What
And
order
then
did you
had
go
to-
on? Were
had to get over it.
you on before them, or you got to watch them and go, how do I follow that?
We were on slightly different stages, so we were in breakout rooms. But yeah, I was able to watch them and interact with them a little bit. But then what was really funny, the event, and this is a little trick, the event was pushing out, oh, we have these names on stage. Like they were obviously using the Gary Vaynerchuk, the Sarah Blakely, and all these kind of amazing headliner names, but they weren't really pushing out a lot of things. So I did an image with the logo and say, speaking at this event, join us at this event. And I put all their headshots and my headshot in, like there was a row of 8 people, 7 really, really well-known people, and me in the middle. And that image went viral. So
nice.
There are people who have seen me on the same stage, on the same image, on the same card. Wasn't actually done officially by the organizers of the event, but all of the information was true and the branding was all true. So that was a little bit of a hack and a win. So.
A lovely way to get the audience on your side before you've even said a word. What's been your best mistake?
Best mistake? Geez, I made a lot of them. Best mistake. Can't think of one. I mean, any mistake that I make, that I learn from, that I reflect on. But I think some of the biggest ones that I still reflect on, I'm still making that mistake. So I'm not sure.
Was it running off stage?
Running off stage? No, at that stage, I didn't know what the hell I was doing. I can't think of something that I would consider my best mistake, if I'm honest.
Okay, we'll move on. Something might come to you. If someone wanted to take one step towards living a good life, what would you tell that person to do?
Before you know where you want to go, you need to know where you are. So doing that reflection, like any map, any roadmap, anywhere you want to go, it's where you're starting from is the most important piece of information right now. So what are your interests? What are your hobbies? What are you able to do? What are you interested? Like understanding that self-awareness, that's the first step.
Yeah, I like that. Who should we talk to next in your life to learn how to live a good life? Is there one mentor that stood out more than anyone else that you've learned colossal amounts from?
Well, I have a mentor who I learn an immense amount from, but he generally doesn't do these things. Actually, a really, really dear friend of mine who wrote a book called Raising Your Kids to Be Brave, Smart and Kind. He's just moved back to the States. He's all about values-based leadership and using values in your family to be able to raise kids to be brave, smart, and kind. He's 3 fantastic daughters. He's somebody you should definitely speak to. bravesmartkind.com is his website.
Oh, I'll get that down.
And if you look at his book, I'm in there at the back.
Nice.
So,
Well, acknowledgement.
Yeah. So very happy to plug PJ.
Good stuff. Good stuff. Well, Stephen, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Was there any last things that you wanted to say that we didn't get to? And after that, we'll where do people find you? Where are the best places for people to find you if they want to connect with you, if they want to look at your courses, if they want to get involved?
So yeah, I mean, I really love the whole idea of living a good life. I mean, I love the idea of your podcast. It is very much in line with me wanting to make the world a better place with happy people and fulfilling, rewarding careers. I think it's a fundamentally important part of it. There's a couple of things that we do. So, I mean, CareerFit is our software. CareerFit.com is our software to help people figure out what's their ideal career based on their unique mix of interests and abilities. LinkedIn, I'm Stephen Shortt. StephenShortt.com will find me. It's a very basic. I need to redo that website. It's a bit old and tired looking. But all of my links are there on StephenShortt.com, and the links to the different businesses and how to get in touch with me if you want to chat with me.
Fantastic. Stephen, thank you so much for coming on.
Pleasure. Thanks a million for having me.
Thanks for watching all the way to the end. All the books and references will be linked down below. And just before you scroll on, please do give it a like and share, and we will see you in the next one. Cheers.